Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, thousands flee fighting in Brazzaville as violence linked to President Sassou Nguesso's re-election last month breaks out in the Congolese capital. The government blames the gun battles on a rebel group known as the Ninjas. Also, a pair of Guantanamo inmates are sent to Senegal as the US rushes to shut down the base in Cuba. Dakar says that it's glad to support the historic decision. And a long-lost queen has finally been returned to her subjects. A Moana pole mask looted from Angola during the civil war is handed back to the country's ambassador here in Paris. But first, thousands fled fighting in Brazzaville on Monday. In violence, the government blamed on a rebel group known as the Ninjas. Streams of panicked people left the city as gunfights broke out in parts of Brazzaville.
The first gunshots rang out in the early hours of the morning. Since, thousands of people living in the southern parts of Brazzaville have fled north, carrying with them as little as possible. Clashes between security forces and anti-government militias in the Congolese capital left them fearing for their safety.
We were woken up at 2 a.m. by sporadic gunfire. It was coming from all directions.
We were told to flee the area before it was too late. We're like orphans, like immigrants. We're not going far. We don't know where to go.
At least one police station and a government building have been attacked. Sources on the ground told France 24 the town hall had been set alight. Hundreds of soldiers have been deployed to control the situation. The government says a group calling itself the Ninja Militia is responsible. They were formerly loyal to the father of Guy Brice-Parfait Koulala, who ran in last month's presidential elections. Koulala says he is not involved in the fighting. Opposition figures claim the election was marred by massive fraud. President Sassou Nguesso won with 60% of the vote. He's acted as the country's head of state for more than 30 of the past 35 years. The country's constitutional court is currently analysing the validity of the election's results.
Well, Nigeria's Ministry of Defense claims that it's arrested the leader of a breakaway faction of Boko Haram. If confirmed, the capture of Ansaru leader Khalil al-Banawi would be the most high-profile of the country's 6-year struggle against an extremist insurgency. Al-Banawi has a $5 million reward on his head. Security agents reportedly tracked him down in the city of Lokoja last Friday. Ansaru is allied with al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and is known for kidnapping foreigners for ransom. South Africa's ruling ANC party held crisis talks on Monday to discuss the fallout from growing calls for President Jacob Zuma to resign over last week's court ruling that found that he flouted the constitution. That was because of his failure to pay back some of the $16 million in public cash spent on upgrading his private home at Nkandla. Parliament's due to debate an opposition motion for Zuma's impeachment on Tuesday. That is unlikely to pass, but the leader's reputation's undoubtedly taken a battering both within and outside of his party. 2 Libyan inmates held for 14 years at the US detention center at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba are being transferred to Senegal. It's one of a handful of West African nations, including Ghana and Mauritania, who've agreed to resettle detainees as President Obama's administration tries to shut Guantanamo down. Both men being handed over were members of the Libya Islamic Fighting Group that was designated a terrorist organization by the US, but neither was ever charged during their time at the terror camp. Well, Colin Baker joins us with more. Colin, the announcement of the arrival of these 2 Libyans came on Monday, but clearly a lot of work would have gone into this prior to that announcement being made. How does Washington convince African nations to take detainees?
Well, it has not been easy, that we can say for sure. I mean, President Obama does want to close this prison, but that requires other countries to accept prisoners. We know the U.S. has not yet accepted any of these prisoners so far. And when it opened, since it's been opened, there were 780 inmates who've been through Guantanamo. Now, only about 89 remain. And out of these 2 men who have been sent here, we do have confirmation that they are here in Senegal now. We know that one of them has been in court twice to fight his detention. He won the most recent writ for habeas corpus back in August, but since then his lawyers have been pressuring for him to be released. We don't really know about the negotiations between Senegal and the U.S. Neither are providing comment for the moment, aside from saying that the transfer was made on a humanitarian basis. And the U.S. has said that Senegal, it believes that Senegal can safely and securely look after these two inmates. Remember, these men can't go back to Libya at the moment because of the state of crisis in Libya. It's interesting that these men were both actually classified under the high-risk identification scheme at Guantanamo, and yet they have been released, showing what human rights lawyers have been saying for a long time, which is that few of these prisoners are too dangerous to transfer. And in the end, due process and release are still the most legal options for many of them.
So why Senegal?
That's an interesting question. It's Independence Day here, and so we suspect that some of these inmates perhaps were already in the country as of this morning, but it was announced this afternoon. It's a day when President Macky Sall has been celebrating the military with flyovers and parades and a big show. There's no official press release yet, so we know they were just received on humanitarian grounds. But when you think about it, Senegal has been engaging with global security issues quite a bit under the Macky Sall presidency. There was the Dakar Security Forum in November. We know that the president has personally been involved in the recent discussions after the coups in Burkina Faso and problems in Guinea-Bissau. And they're also hosting this landmark human rights trial here, as well as having an observer seat on the Security Council. So perhaps this is a way of showing, it's perhaps a gesture that follows some of these other moves to set an example in the region on the part of Macky Sall and this peaceful West African country.
Thanks very much. Colin Baker there for us in Dakar. Now, the UN is working towards getting a police deployment out to Burundi after Bujumbura finally agreed over the weekend to accept a force being sent in. Now, the matter caused months of tensions between the African nation and international and regional powers. Burundi's refused to accept a peacekeeping deployment, but has compromised on accepting UN police. Since last April, hundreds of people have been killed in unrest caused by President Pierre Nkurunziza's controversial third mandate. The US and others are growing increasingly frustrated over the apparent lack of political will to engage in credible peace talks.
It's past urgent. I mean, we've already seen 250,000 human beings have to flee the country as refugees. We don't even know how many have died. We've seen extrajudicial killing and torture spike. We're seeing a rise of economic crimes based on the economic crisis. So this is already a very serious situation. We know the government's in very tough fiscal shape as well. But these are solvable problems if people come to the table in good faith. But the situation is very urgent.
Ebola survivors in Sierra Leone held protests in Freetown on Monday, demanding more support from the government. Demonstrators say that the state hasn't delivered on promises to improve care and to help the families of those who've lost their main breadwinners to the virus. Over the last 2 years, more than 11,300 people have died in a West African Ebola epidemic. Sierra Leone marked the end of active transmission in March, but a new but small wave of outbreaks have hit Liberia and Guinea since. And finally, a long-lost monarch has been returned to Angolan hands. A 19th century mask that was looted from the Lunda Museum in the last century was officially handed over to the Angolan embassy after having been tracked down by art historians on the hunt for missing pieces of the continent's heritage. Ben Barnier tells us more.
A Luanda queen at last to be returned to her kingdom. This 19th century Moana-Poa mask was stolen from Angola's Lunda Museum at some point during the 1975 to 2002 Civil War. It spent years in the hands of an American artist and was passed on to a private collector in Paris until this French art dealer working for the Syndicat Colo Foundation spotted the mask in an ad for an international fair.
The dealer didn't know that it was a mask from Dundo. So as soon as we had that information, we called him and say, listen, there is a problem with that mask. You're going to have to do something because you can't sell it. It has been stolen in the Dundo Museum. Of course, he didn't know and say, no problem.
The recovered mask is one of 5 looted works from the Dundo Museum tracked down by Syndicat Colo. The foundation tries to buy stolen pieces from art dealers and private owners below market value with one goal in mind: returning the precious masks and statues where they belong.
Our national identity comes from our language, our songs, our poetry, our food, our art, our music, our dances. It is very important for Angola to get back all the works of art which were exported illegally from our country.
qui ont quitté les pays d'une manière illégale.
This mask will be displayed in Luanda for the 40th anniversary of Angola's independence. Meanwhile, the Sindicato Colo squad will be on the lookout for more stolen works of African art.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Do stay with us, though. A short break and more coming up.